My father found $25,000 under my mattress. I spent it on your sister's wedding. Consider it a gift, he said. I just looked at him and replied, understood. 2 minutes later, my grandfather walked in and asked, Emily, the money I gave your father to keep, where is it? Dad went pale. I smiled, whispered something to Grandpa, and watched him pick up his phone. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I was 27, still living in the small two-bedroom apartment I'd been renting since trade school. Not glamorous, but it was mine. I worked long shifts as a licensed electrician, so I didn't go out much. I didn't blow money on vacations or new cars. Every extra dollar went into cash savings, not in a bank, but literally under my mattress. Yeah, I know, it sounds paranoid, but after years of loans to family that were never paid back, I didn't exactly want a paper trail. That cash was my emergency fund, my get out if things go bad money. So when I came home one Saturday to find my dad sitting at my kitchen table with that smug little smirk he always wore when he thought he'd outsmarted me, I knew something was wrong. Emily, he started, leaning back in my chair like he owned the place. You'll be happy to know your sister's wedding was a huge success. Everyone had a great time. I frowned. That's good. What's that got to do with me? He gave this casual shrug, the kind that always came before he said something insane. I found that money under your mattress, 25 grand. My stomach dropped. I spent it on the wedding. Consider it a gift from you to your sister. I just stared at him. You what? Come on, he said, waving a hand like I was overreacting. You weren't using it, and family helps family. She'll remember this forever. My jaw tightened, but I forced my voice flat. Understood. I didn't yell. I didn't demand he pay me back. I just stood there, keeping my face unreadable. 2 minutes later, the front door opened and my grandfather walked in. He was holding his cane, eyes sharp as ever, despite being in his 70s. Emily, he said, looking straight past my dad, the money I gave your father to keep. Where is it? Dad froze. The color drained from his face. I smiled, leaned toward Grandpa, and whispered a few words in his ear. His expression hardened instantly. Without another question, he pulled out his phone and started dialing. 30 seconds later, there was a knock at the door. A man in a black suit stepped in and silently slid a thick folder onto my kitchen table. I guess I should back up and explain how we got to the point where my dad thinks stealing $25,000 from me is no big deal. I grew up in a family where family helps family was less of a value and more of a one-way rule. My sister Claire is 2 years younger, but you'd think she was made of glass the way my parents treated her. Any problem she had became the entire family's emergency. Any success of mine was treated like background noise. I learned early that my role wasn't daughter, it was provider. I started working construction at 18, putting in overtime, saving, thinking I'd get ahead. Every time I started to make progress, some urgent family need popped up. Dad's truck broke down. I covered repairs. Mom's medical bill? Paid it. Claire wanted to start a wellness business selling overpriced candles online. Guess who bought her inventory? And the thing is, they never asked nicely. It was always implied that I owed them. Like Dad loved to remind me, we gave you life. We're not asking for much in return. Over the years, I'd gotten smarter about it. I stopped keeping large sums in my bank account where they could guilt-trip me into transferring money. That's how the cash under the mattress started. It wasn't about hiding from the IRS or anything shady. It was about keeping my money where only I could touch it. That $25,000 wasn't spare money. It was my safety net. I'd been saving for years. Cash jobs on weekends, side wiring gigs, bonuses from overtime. It was my down payment for getting out of this cycle. Claire's wedding had been a circus from the start. She wanted the perfect day. And by perfect, I mean something way beyond what she and her fiancé could afford. Venue on the water, live band, imported flowers. The whole thing was pushing $60,000. I assumed they'd scale it down. Instead, every time they hit a budget wall, Dad would magically find a solution. Looking back, it's obvious now he was eyeing my savings the whole time. I just didn't think he'd actually cross that line. The worst part? Claire didn't work full-time. She had a part-time gig at some boutique, posted on Instagram about hustling, but spent more time planning this wedding than earning money for it. And Mom and Dad just encouraged it, talking about how a wedding only happens once and family will make it work. Translation: I would make it work. Grandpa was the wild card here. He's my dad's father, old school, worked his whole life in logistics, built himself up from nothing. The man knows the value of a dollar and doesn't throw it around. A few months earlier, he'd sold a piece of land and given Dad $25,000 in cash to hold for him temporarily. Said he didn't trust banks and was sorting out some estate stuff. That's the part I didn't know until Grandpa walked into my apartment that day. The wedding money Dad claimed to have taken from me, it wasn't even just mine. It was a mix of my savings and Grandpa's stash. Dad must have found my cash while snooping for his. Realized it was almost the same amount and decided to lump it together. He's always been confident he can talk his way out of anything, especially with family. He uses the same playbook every time. Guilt first, then minimization, then outright denial if you push too hard. When I was younger, I'd fold instantly just to avoid the drama, but lately, I'd been done. And here's where the tension ramps up. Because Grandpa isn't the type you can manipulate with family helps family speeches. I've seen this man cut business partners out of his life over $500 and a lie. The second he asked Dad about the money and saw his reaction, I knew Dad was screwed. That folder the man in the black suit brought, I had a pretty good guess what was inside. Receipts, contracts, maybe even something legal. Grandpa doesn't bluff. Up until that point, I'd always been the one quietly absorbing the loss, keeping my mouth shut to keep the peace. But watching Dad's face go pale, realizing for the first time he might be the one answering for his actions, that's when I decided I wasn't just going to let this blow over. Because for the first time in my life, the problem wasn't just my burden to carry. It was his, and I was more than ready to let him feel exactly what I'd been feeling for years. Grandpa didn't waste time. He opened the folder right there on my kitchen table. Inside were photos of the cash stacks he'd given Dad, a signage note from Dad acknowledging he was holding the money, and the part that made my stomach drop, a printed text conversation where Dad promised to keep it safe until the probate stuff cleared. Dad's eyes darted between me, Grandpa, and the man in the black suit. Dad, it's not what you think. Grandpa cut him off. It's exactly what I think. You took money that wasn't yours, and from what I'm hearing, you took your daughter's money too. Dad's face twisted. That's an exaggeration. It was just sitting there, I thought. No, I said, stepping in. My voice was steady, but inside I was boiling. You didn't think. You decided. You decided your daughter's flowers and cake were worth more than me having a safety net. You decided that 25 grand wasn't doing anything important under my mattress, so why not just take it? Dad turned on me fast. You've been hoarding cash while your sister needed help and you couldn't even offer. Family helps family. I almost laughed. That line doesn't work anymore. I've been helping family since I was old enough to have a paycheck. You've drained me for years. And the one time I keep something for myself, you steal it. Steal? His voice went up a notch, the same intimidation tactic he'd used my whole life. You're calling your own father a thief? I didn't flinch. Yeah, that's what it's called when you take something that isn't yours without asking. Grandpa leaned forward. Where's the money now? Dad hesitated, just a little too long. It's gone, he admitted finally. Deposits, vendors, non-refundable stuff for the wedding. Grandpa's jaw tightened. Then you'll replace it, every cent, with interest. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. You can't just demand... I can, Grandpa snapped. That cash was mine. The fact you also took from your daughter, that's between you and her. But you'll make me whole, or I'll make sure everyone in this family and the law knows exactly what you did. That was the first time I'd ever seen Dad look cornered. He glanced at me like he was expecting me to step in and soften the blow. Not this time. In case it's not clear, I said, I want my 25 back too. I don't care if you sell your car or cancel the honeymoon. I'm done pretending this stuff doesn't matter. Dad tried one last play, the guilt trip. Do you really want to humiliate your sister? Do you want her big day ruined because you're making a scene? I stared at him. You already ruined it for me when you took the money. The wedding's not my problem. Getting my money back is. The man in the black suit, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. I'll draw up the repayment agreement. Failure to meet the deadlines will result in legal action. I suggest you take this seriously. Dad opened his mouth, but Grandpa stood up, cutting off whatever excuse was about to come out. We're done here. You'll hear from him with the details. He nodded toward me. And you, Emily. Good job holding your ground. Took you long enough. They left together, the man in the black suit carrying the folder, Grandpa walking with the same steady pace he always had. Dad just sat there at my table, deflated, for a long moment before muttering, You didn't have to bring him into this. I grabbed my jacket. You brought him into it the second you touched his money. You just didn't think you'd get caught. As I walked out, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just anger, but control. For once, The fallout wasn't mine to carry. It was his, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to help him out of it. The fallout started almost immediately. 2 days after the confrontation, Dad called me. I didn't pick up. The voicemail was a mix of annoyance and fake calm. "Emily, we need to talk. Let's work this out like family. No need to make things messy." I didn't respond. By the end of the week, Mom was texting me instead. Her message was pure guilt script. "Your sister's been crying for days. She's worried you're trying to ruin her wedding. Can't you just let this go until after the ceremony?" Let it go. They'd stolen $25,000 from me and from Grandpa, and their main concern was keeping the party vibes intact. Word must have spread faster than I thought, because my cousin called to say Grandpa had already told a couple of uncles what happened. Knowing my family, that meant it was only a matter of time before everyone knew. The difference this time was Dad couldn't spin it. Grandpa was a trusted voice in the family. If he said you'd crossed a line, people believed him. Within a week, Dad was in full damage control mode. He called Grandpa, tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding, claimed he thought the money under my mattress was all mine, and that using it for Claire was a family investment. Grandpa didn't buy it. I know because he called me right after and repeated the conversation almost word for word, ending with, "Your father's a fool if he thinks he can talk his way out of this." Meanwhile, Claire finally called me herself. No hello, no how are you, just straight into it. "Why are you doing this to me? You're making Dad's life hell, and it's stressing Mom out. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life." I kept my voice flat. "Your wedding isn't my responsibility. My money was taken without my permission. I want it back, that's all." She scoffed. "It's not like you needed it right away. You live in that same crappy apartment. You're single. You don't even travel. What else would you spend it on?" That's when I realized she actually believed she had more of a right to my money than I did. I didn't bother arguing. Doesn't matter what I planned to do with it. It was mine, and Grandpa's, and Dad had no right. She huffed something about me ruining everything and hung up. A few days later, Dad finally sent me a text. "I'll get you your money back in installments. Can we agree to keep this between us now?" I ignored it. We weren't doing this on his terms. Grandpa had the repayment agreement drafted within the week. It was brutal. Deadlines, interest, and a clause that said if Dad missed a payment, the entire remaining balance would be due immediately. He sent me a copy and told me he'd insisted my portion be included in the same agreement, so Dad couldn't conveniently prioritize him over me. The first payment was due 2 weeks later. Dad paid, but I could tell it hurt. He sold his fishing boat, the one he bragged about every summer. I won't lie, I smiled when I heard that from my uncle. By the time the wedding rolled around, the tension was thick enough to choke on. I showed up because Grandpa told me to. "You've made your point," he said. "Now don't give them an excuse to paint you as the villain." I kept my distance, avoided family photos, and left before the reception ended. Claire looked like she wanted to throw her bouquet at my head. The real shift happened in the months after. Dad kept making payments, but each one came with more bitterness. He'd send short texts like, "Transferred. Happy now?" Or "There goes another chunk of my retirement." I never responded. Claire and I barely spoke, except for one awkward family barbecue where she muttered, "Hope you're enjoying bleeding Dad dry." I just shrugged and went back to my burger. Here's the thing, though. While Dad was busy resenting me, his relationship with Grandpa was falling apart. Grandpa started keeping his distance, stopped inviting Dad to poker nights, and even skipped his birthday for the first time ever. One night, Grandpa called me over for dinner. Over steak and potatoes, he said, "I should have stepped in sooner. You've been carrying more than your share for years. That stops now. If they ask you for money again, send them to me." It was the first time anyone in my family had explicitly told me not to give in. And it felt freeing. As the months passed, I started noticing the benefits of keeping my boundaries. My savings began to rebuild. I picked up a side contract wiring a small business, which covered a chunk of what I'd lost. More importantly, I realized I didn't dread seeing my phone light up with Dad's name anymore, because I knew I didn't owe him anything. By the time the last payment came through, almost a year later, the family dynamics had shifted completely. Grandpa treated me like a partner now. He even asked me to help manage a small rental property he owned. Dad, on the other hand, avoided me at gatherings. Claire stuck to passive-aggressive comments, but even she had stopped asking for favors. They'd learned maybe not to respect me, but at least to think twice before treating me like an ATM. The day that final payment hit my account, I withdrew it in cash, just for the satisfaction of counting it at my kitchen table. This time, I didn't stick it under the mattress. I opened a safe deposit box in my name only. Because if there's one thing I learned from all of this, It's that keeping your boundaries isn't about being cold. It's about making sure the people who burned you once don't get the chance to do it again. And in my family, that's the only way to survive. It's been a little over a year since that day in my kitchen, the day Dad casually told me he'd gifted my $25,000 to my sister. The money's back in my hands now, every cent. But what I really got out of this wasn't just repayment, it was clarity. I don't feel guilty anymore for saying no. I don't get that familiar knot in my stomach when I see a text from Dad or Mom, wondering what urgent expense they're about to dump on me. The answer is simple now: no. No explanations, no guilt trips, no follow-up arguments, just a clean, hard boundary. Funny thing is, life actually got quieter. Once they realized I wasn't budging, the calls slowed down. No more, can you cover this until payday, or we'll pay you back when things settle down. They know the line's drawn, and crossing it comes with consequences. I didn't just stop being the family ATM. I stopped being the person they could automatically count on to clean up their messes. Grandpa and I talk more now than we ever did. Sometimes it's about business. He's teaching me how to handle the rental property like it's a crash course in independence. Sometimes it's just about life. Last month, he handed me a small envelope with $500 inside and said, "For emergencies. Real ones. The kind you don't tell your father about." It wasn't about the cash, it was about the message. I trust you to take care of yourself. Claire's wedding photos made their way onto social media months ago. Everyone's smiling, pretending the whole thing was pure joy. But I know the truth behind the scenes. The tension, the repayment agreement, the boat Dad had to sell, the awkward silences between family members who knew what had gone down. I don't feel bad about it, not even a little. Claire still doesn't think she did anything wrong. But that's her problem to figure out, not mine. Dad? Our relationship is basically polite strangers now. At gatherings, he gives me a nod, maybe a "how's work," before moving on. That's fine. I'm done measuring my worth by how much attention or approval I get from him. I used to bend over backwards for a scrap of acknowledgement. Now I barely notice when it's not there. When I think back on it, the turning point wasn't Grandpa walking in with the man in the black suit. It was me deciding to stay calm when Dad tried to frame it as a gift. Old me would have exploded, yelled, maybe even given in after enough guilt tripping. But that day, I just said understood and let the trap close around him. That's the part I'm proud of. Not because it got me my money back, though it did, but because it proved I can control the situation without blowing up or backing down. It's a different kind of strength. Since then, a few people in the family have quietly pulled me aside. They've admitted they've had similar experiences with Dad. Promises made, debts unpaid, favors taken for granted. They all say the same thing. Wish I'd stood my ground sooner. It's strange how many people know what's happening, but choose not to fight it, because keeping the peace feels easier in the moment. I get it. I lived that way for years. But now I know that peace built on being taken advantage of isn't peace at all. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You're not a bad daughter, sister, or relative for refusing to be used. The people who truly care about you will respect your boundaries. The ones who only see you as a resource will get angry when you stop giving. And that anger is just proof you made the right call. So now when I see that safe deposit box key on my counter, I think about how far I've come. That cash isn't just money anymore. It's a reminder that I don't owe my family my financial security, my peace of mind, or my future just because we share DNA. I gave enough of my life to keeping other people afloat. Now I'm finally swimming for myself. And the best part? I don't just feel no guilt. I feel something I never expected to feel about all of this. Pride. One more thing I remind myself when doubt creeps in. I didn't choose conflict. I chose boundaries. The difference matters. When Dad tried a soft reset last month, drop by for dinner, we miss you. I set a simple rule. We can meet in public, and money, favors, and Claire's drama are off the table. He agreed. We met at a diner. No speeches, no traps. We talked about football, work, Grandpa's tomatoes. Then the check came and he hesitated, waiting for the old me. I let the silence do the work. He paid. We parted civil, not close, and that was enough. On the walk home, I felt light, like I'd finally stepped out of a costume I'd worn for years. Maybe that's all closure is, the day you stop auditioning for a role you never wanted. I went home, locked the safe key away, and slept like I hadn't in a decade. In the morning, I booked a weekend trip. Nothing fancy, just a lake and quiet. I paid with my own card, packed light, and left my phone on silent. No emergencies followed. That was the sign.